12. Black R&B legends who died of drug overdose. They were legends who lit up the world with their voices, selling millions of records, filling arenas, and shaping the very soul of R&B. Yet behind the fame and flashing lights was a darker truth: loneliness, pain, and addictions that ended in tragedy. From Prince's mysterious final days to Whitney Houston's heartbreaking silence and Michael Jackson's shocking collapse, these stars remind us how even greatness can be destroyed by demons hidden from the public eye. Stay with us as Legends of Black Excellence uncovers the chilling stories of 12 Black R&B icons who died of overdose. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Prince Rogers Nelson was not just a musician. He was a revolution packed into a small frame. Born in Minneapolis in 1958, he grew up in a turbulent household where music was both an escape and a calling. By the age of 7, Prince was already composing songs, and by 19, he had secured his first record deal. What set him apart was not only his raw talent, but his ability to command every aspect of music. He sang, wrote, produced, and played nearly every instrument on his debut album For You, 1978. His artistry blurred boundaries, mixing funk, R&B, rock, jazz, and soul into a style no one had heard before. The world came to know his genius through albums like 1999, Purple Rain, and Sign of the Times. His 1984 masterpiece, Purple Rain, sold over 25 million copies worldwide and won both an Academy Award and Grammy, cementing him as one of the greatest performers of all time. On stage, Prince was electric. At barely 5'2", weighing under 130 pounds, he could fill stadiums with his presence. Every performance dripped with charisma, sexuality, and raw artistry. He wasn't just performing songs, he was channeling an experience that made audiences tremble. But behind the dazzling costumes, flamboyant guitar solos, and global fame, Prince was quietly battling his own body. Years of high-energy performances, dramatic splits, and endless tours had left him with chronic hip pain. Too proud and too private to undergo major surgery that would limit his movement, he turned to painkillers as a way to stay on stage. This dependency, while hidden from the public, would later lead to his tragic downfall. Do you think the music industry puts too much pressure on artists to keep performing even at the cost of their health? In April 2016, the world was shattered when Prince was found unresponsive in his Paisley Park estate in Minnesota. He was only 57. The cause, an accidental overdose of fentanyl, a synthetic opioid far more powerful than morphine. Investigators later revealed he had unknowingly taken counterfeit pills that contained lethal amounts of the drug. The man who seemed immortal, who could play 27 instruments, who sold over 150 million records, who gave us When Doves Cry and Kiss, was gone in an instant. Fans worldwide mourned not just a star, but a visionary who had reshaped music forever. Prince's death revealed a painful irony. For someone who championed independence, fighting record labels for ownership of his masters, changing his name to a symbol to break free from contracts, his final chapter was one of dependence, a reliance on medication to simply endure the physical pain of being the very performer fans demanded. His story forces us to look deeper into the hidden costs of greatness, the loneliness, the secrecy, and the impossible standards placed on icons. Yet even in death, Prince's light refuses to dim. His music continues to inspire new generations, from pop to R&B to hip-hop. The purple legacy he left behind serves both as a celebration of boundless creativity and a warning about the unseen battles that too many legends face. Every time Purple Rain plays, audiences are reminded of a man who gave everything to his art until there was nothing left to give. Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston was more than just a singer. She was a force of nature. Born in Newark, New Jersey in 1963, she was destined for greatness. Her mother, gospel legend Cissy Houston, was her earliest mentor, while her cousins Dionne Warwick and Dee Dee Warwick helped pave the way for her musical roots. Even Aretha Franklin was a close family friend. By the time Whitney was a teenager, her angelic voice had already caught the attention of record producers. Signed by Clive Davis at just 19, she quickly transformed into one of the most celebrated vocalists the world has ever known. Her debut album, Whitney Houston, 1985, sold over 25 million copies worldwide and gave us timeless hits like Greatest Love of All and How Will I Know. Then came her second album, Whitney, 1987, which made history by debuting at #1 on the Billboard charts, the first for a female artist. With 7 consecutive #1 singles on the Billboard Hot 100, she surpassed even the Beatles. By the early 90s, Whitney was an unstoppable icon, and her performance of I Will Always Love You for the Bodyguard soundtrack sold over 20 million copies, becoming one of the best-selling singles in history. Yet behind the dazzling smile and thunderous applause, Whitney carried a burden that grew heavier with time. Her tumultuous marriage to Bobby Brown, tabloid scrutiny, and the relentless pressure of fame eroded her spirit. Reports of drug use began surfacing in the 90s, but many dismissed them, clinging to the image of a flawless diva. Over time, her radiant presence dimmed. Her once effortless voice grew strained, her appearances often leaving fans worried. Have you ever noticed how fame can sometimes isolate artists instead of protecting them? By 2012, Whitney's health was visibly deteriorating. On February 11th of that year, just one day before the Grammy Awards, she was found lifeless in a bathtub at the Beverly Hilton Hotel. She was only 48. The coroner's report revealed she had accidentally drowned with cocaine use and heart disease listed as contributing factors. The world gasped, not just because of the suddenness, but because of the cruel contrast between her glorious career and her tragic ending. Her death was more than just the loss of a star. It was the silencing of the voice. Whitney had sold over 200 million records, won 6 Grammys, 22 American Music Awards, and left behind a catalog that defined love, heartbreak, and triumph. But her passing also underscored a painful reality. Even those who appear invincible on stage are still vulnerable in private. Today, every time I Will Always Love You plays, it serves not just as a love song, but as a bittersweet eulogy. Whitney's story is a reminder of the immense weight carried by those who live under the spotlight. Her brilliance will never fade, but her tragic downfall remains one of music's most haunting lessons. A star who gave the world everything but could not save herself from the shadows. Michael Jackson. Michael Joseph Jackson was not just a singer, he was an era. Born in Gary, Indiana in 1958, he began his career at just 6 years old as the lead voice of the Jackson 5. Even as a child, his charisma was undeniable. Every spin, every note carried a power far beyond his age. With ABC and I Want You Back, Michael quickly became a household name. But as he matured, he transformed into something the world had never seen, the king of pop. His solo career exploded with Off the Wall 1979, and then came Thriller 1982, the best-selling album of all time, with over 70 million copies sold globally. Michael didn't just create music, he created a cultural phenomenon. The moonwalk, the glittering glove, the cinematic music videos each became symbols of artistic innovation. In the 1980s and 90s, he was untouchable. Songs like Billie Jean Beat It and Man in the Mirror defined not just music charts, but entire generations. But behind the immaculate choreography and thunderous applause was a man haunted by insomnia, physical pain, and the crushing weight of global fame. In the 1990s and 2000s, as lawsuits and tabloid scandals swirled, Michael's reliance on medication grew. Friends and staff recalled nights when he begged for sleep, natural rest eluded him. He trusted his personal physician, Dr. Conrad Murray, to help regulate his body with a drug most doctors would never use outside of hospitals, propofol, a powerful anesthetic. Do you believe the pressure to stay perfect for fans can push even the greatest artists toward dangerous choices? On June 25, 2009, the world stopped. Michael Jackson, just 50 years old, was pronounced dead in Los Angeles. The cause, acute propofol intoxication administered improperly by his doctor. The news hit like a shockwave, silencing millions who believed their idol was untouchable. For weeks, streets across the globe filled with candlelight vigils, and his memorial service drew an estimated 2.5 billion viewers worldwide, the largest in television history. Michael's death highlighted the cruel paradox of his life. The man who brought joy to billions could not find peace for himself. The king of pop could command entire stadiums, but alone in his bedroom, he was fragile, restless, and dependent on dangerous medication just to close his eyes. Still, his legacy is monumental. With 13 Grammy Awards, 39 Guinness World Records, and sales of over 400 million records, Michael Jackson remains one of the most influential entertainers in history. His artistry shaped R&B, pop, hip-hop, and dance forever. Yet his passing serves as a chilling reminder of the price of superstardom. Every time Thriller plays at Halloween or Heal the World is sung at charity events, the world remembers not only the brilliance, but also the tragedy. Michael Jackson gave his soul to his fans, but in the end, he couldn't find rest for his own. David Ruffin. David Ruffin's life is one of the most dramatic stories in Motown history. Born Davis Eli Ruffin in 1941 in Mississippi, he grew up singing in churches and gospel groups before moving to Detroit, where fate introduced him to Motown Records. In 1964, he joined The Temptations, and within a year his unmistakable tenor became the group's defining sound. When he sang the opening lines of My Girl in 1965, his voice carried a mixture of sweetness and urgency that made the song an instant classic. For many, Ruffin was the soul of The Temptations. His tall frame, signature glasses, and powerful voice captivated audiences. But with fame came inner conflict. Ruffin longed for more recognition. He wanted to be known not just as part of a group, but as the star. Tensions grew within The Temptations as Ruffin's ego clashed with the ensemble's unity. Rumors spread that he wanted to rename the group David Ruffin and The Temptations. His brilliance on stage was undeniable, but his ambition and increasing dependence on drugs strained relationships. By 1968, he was dismissed from the group, a devastating blow that marked the beginning of his slow decline. Still, Ruffin pursued a solo career. His single, My Whole World Ended the Moment You Left Me, reached the Billboard Top 10, showing he still had the magic. Yet sustaining success proved difficult. As the years passed, his addiction to cocaine deepened and opportunities dwindled. Instead of stadiums, he often found himself singing in small clubs, his voice still rich but his presence a shadow of what it once was. Do you think great talent can survive without discipline? Or does the pressure of fame almost always catch up in the end? By the late 1980s, Ruffin was struggling both financially and personally. He reunited briefly with fellow Temptations members for special tours, reminding fans of his unmatched voice. But the reunion also highlighted how far he had fallen from his Motown glory days. On June 1, 1991, tragedy struck. Ruffin was found dead in Philadelphia after suffering a fatal overdose of crack cocaine. He was just 50 years old. Reports circulated that the large amount of money he was carrying that night had mysteriously disappeared, leading to speculation that he had been abandoned or even exploited in his final hours. His funeral drew hundreds of mourners, including Stevie Wonder, Aretha Franklin, and members of The Temptations. Fans wept as they remembered the man whose voice had defined an era. Despite his flaws, David Ruffin's artistry remains immortal. Rolling Stone later ranked him among the 100 greatest singers of all time, cementing his legacy as one of Motown's brightest yet most troubled stars. David Ruffin's story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of ego fame and addiction. His rise was meteoric, his fall heartbreaking, and his death a reminder of how even golden voices can be silenced too soon. Still, every time My Girl plays, the world hears his soul again, pure yearning and unforgettable. Frankie Lyman. Frankie Lyman's story is both dazzling and tragic, a meteoric rise that burned out before he even reached adulthood. Born in Harlem in 1942, Frankie grew up in a poor but musically rich neighborhood. By the age of 12, his angelic soprano voice was already drawing attention. In 1956, at just 13 years old, he became the lead singer of the Teenagers, a group that would forever change the sound of R&B. Their breakout hit, Why Do Fools Fall in Love, was a cultural earthquake crossing racial boundaries, topping charts in both the US and the UK, and making Frankie one of the first black teen idols in America. But the very thing that made him famous, his childlike voice, became a curse. As puberty set in, his voice changed and audiences no longer embraced him as they once did. The industry that had profited from his youthful charm quickly turned its back. By the late 1950s, Frankie found himself adrift, struggling to reclaim his place in a music world that had moved on. Fame had arrived too early, stripping him of a normal childhood, and when it disappeared, he was left with emptiness and isolation. Adding to his downfall were deeply personal struggles. Frankie began using heroin at just 15, reportedly introduced to the drug by older women he was involved with. For a boy barely in high school, the combination of fame, adult relationships, and addiction proved devastating. He spiraled into a cycle of arrests, rehab attempts, and fleeting comebacks. At times, his spark still shone. Audiences recall moments in Harlem clubs when he would sing impromptu, and the room fell silent, transported back to that magical voice of 1956. Do you think child stars today are better protected from exploitation, or are the same patterns still repeating in modern entertainment? Despite these moments, Frankie's life continued to unravel. By the late 1960s, he was virtually forgotten by the mainstream, remembered only as a cautionary tale. He married 3 times, sometimes without legal divorces in between, and his personal life was as turbulent as his career. On February 27, 1968, at just 25 years old, Frankie was found dead in his grandmother's apartment in Harlem from a heroin overdose. He had been attempting a comeback with Roulette Records, but the world would never hear his adult voice on a major stage again. His death shocked those who remembered the wide-eyed teenager who once sang of love with such innocence. Instead of growing old alongside the legends of his generation, Frankie became a symbol of lost potential, a reminder of what happens when a child is pushed into an adult world too quickly. Yet Frankie's legacy endures. His pioneering role as a young black teen idol opened doors for future artists from Motown groups to modern boy bands. The song Why Do Fools Fall in Love still resonates, its bittersweet lyrics echoing the brevity of Frankie's own life. He remains a haunting figure in music history, a boy who gave the world his voice but never got the chance to truly live his life. Billie Holiday. Billie Holiday's life was as raw and haunting as the voice that made her a legend. Born Eleanora Fagan in 1915 in Philadelphia and raised mostly in Baltimore, she endured a childhood scarred by poverty, abuse, and abandonment. By her early teens, she was singing in Harlem nightclubs, trading her suffering for a microphone. What emerged was unlike anything audiences had ever heard, a fragile, trembling voice that carried the weight of lived experience. She didn't just sing songs, she confessed them. Her rise was swift. Discovered in the early 1930s, Billie began recording with jazz greats like Benny Goodman, Count Basie, and Artie Shaw. At a time when black female singers rarely crossed into mainstream stages, she broke barriers with her ability to infuse raw emotion into every lyric. Her 1939 recording of Strange Fruit was nothing short of revolutionary, a harrowing protest against lynching that Time magazine later called the song of the century. It took immense courage to sing it, and it cemented Billie as not just an entertainer, but a fearless truth-teller. But the applause on stage was never enough to silence her private demons. Billie struggled with heroin addiction for much of her life, introduced by her abusive partners and fueled by the emotional scars she carried. Alcohol and drugs became her escape, even as they eroded her health and career. By the 1940s, she was banned from many New York clubs after being arrested on drug charges. For an artist whose entire identity was tied to her voice and stage, this punishment was devastating. Do you think society was harsher on Billie because she was a black woman, daring to speak out both through her music and her choices? By the 1950s, Billy's struggles were visible. Once commanding Carnegie Hall, she was often found performing in smaller clubs. Her voice now cracked and weary, but still carrying a depth no one else could touch. Fans recall the pain in her rendition of Good Morning Heartache, a song that seemed less like a performance and more like a confession of her daily battle with sorrow. Her final years were cruel. In 1959, at just 44 years old, Billy was admitted to a New York hospital suffering from liver and heart failure. Yet even there, she was placed under police guard, arrested for drug possession as she lay dying. Her bank account contained only a few dollars, a tragic contrast to the immense cultural wealth she had created. On July 17, 1959, Billie Holiday's voice was silenced forever. Her death was officially attributed to cirrhosis of the liver complicated by years of substance abuse, but her real cause was far deeper, a society that exploited her talent while punishing her vulnerability. Today, Billie Holiday is remembered as one of the greatest jazz and R&B vocalists in history. Her recordings from Lady Sings the Blues to Strange Fruit remain eternal reminders that beauty can come from pain. She sang with a broken heart and the world felt every note. Esther Phillips. Esther Phillips' voice was unlike anyone else's, raspy, aching, and soaked in emotion. Born Esther Mae Jones in Galveston, Texas in 1935, she was discovered as a teenager by the legendary bandleader Johnny Otis. At just 14, she recorded Double-Crossing Blues with the Johnny Otis Quintet under the name Little Esther, and it became a #1 R&B hit. Practically overnight, she was thrust into stardom, celebrated as a child prodigy whose tone carried the wisdom of a woman far beyond her years. But fame, as it often does, came with hidden costs. By her late teens, Esther was already battling heroin addiction, a struggle that would shadow her for the rest of her life, while her peers were securing steady careers. Esther found herself in cycles of brief comebacks followed by relapses. Still, her resilience and sheer talent allowed her to return to the spotlight multiple times. In the 1960s and 70s, she re-emerged with unforgettable renditions of songs like Release Me and I Love Him, and her Grammy-nominated What a Difference a Day Makes. Her ability to turn even the simplest lyric into a confession made her beloved by fans who connected to her vulnerability. Yet the emotional weight of her songs often mirrored the turmoil in her personal life. Esther's health began to suffer as years of drug abuse took a toll on her body. Friends recalled her unshakable determination to perform even when she was gravely ill. On one occasion, she reportedly left the hospital with an IV still in her arm to fulfill a concert obligation. That kind of devotion was heartbreaking. It revealed how deeply she needed the stage, even as it was killing her. Do you think audiences sometimes forget the heavy sacrifices artists make just to give us their music? By the early 1980s, Esther's once powerful voice was growing weaker. Her body, ravaged by years of addiction and liver damage, struggled to keep up with her spirit. In 1984, at only 48 years old, Esther Phillips died of liver and kidney failure directly linked to her heroin use. The music world mourned, but her passing didn't receive the massive coverage of more mainstream stars, another cruel reminder of how some legacies fade too quietly. Still, her influence endures. Esther's raw, emotional delivery inspired countless artists in soul jazz and R&B. She proved that perfection wasn't necessary to move people, truth was. Every crack in her voice carried authenticity. Every phrase held pain, and every song revealed a piece of her soul. For fans and fellow musicians, she remains an icon of honesty in music. Esther Phillips' story is both inspiring and tragic, a young girl with a once-in-a-generation voice who soared, stumbled, and fought to rise again only to be taken too soon. Today, when What a Difference a Day Makes plays, listeners hear not just a song, but the echo of a woman who poured every ounce of her brokenness into her art, and that makes her unforgettable. Coolio. Artist Leon Ivy Jr., known to the world as Coolio, was born in 1963 in Compton, California, a place where survival often demanded creativity, toughness, or both. As a young man, he dabbled in street life, but also discovered the catharsis of poetry and rap. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, as hip-hop was exploding on the West Coast, Coolio carved out his own space with sharp storytelling and an energetic delivery. His breakthrough came in 1994 with It Takes a Thief, featuring the hit Fantastic Voyage. But it was 1995's Gangsta's Paradise that immortalized him. Featured on the soundtrack of the film Dangerous Minds, the track shot to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and earned him a Grammy Award for Best Rap Solo Performance. The song's haunting sample of Stevie Wonder's Pastime Paradise and Coolio's gripping lyrics painted a stark picture of life in the streets. It sold over 6 million copies worldwide and remains one of the most iconic hip-hop songs of all time. At the peak of the 1990s, Coolio wasn't just a rapper, he was a cultural phenomenon. But as quickly as fame rose, it began to slip. While he continued to release music, none matched the towering success of Gangsta's Paradise. Still, he kept touring, often finding enthusiastic audiences overseas, even when U.S. radio airwaves moved on to new stars. Fans in Germany, Italy, and the UK recall how Coolio gave his all at every performance, proof that he lived for the stage long after the spotlight had dimmed. Do you think artists are ever truly ready for the pressure of having one massive hit that overshadows the rest of their career? Behind the scenes, however, Coolio struggled. Reports over the years highlighted his battles with drug use, financial instability, and the relentless pressure of staying relevant in an ever-changing music industry. On September 28, 2022, tragedy struck. Coolio was found dead in a friend's Los Angeles home at the age of 59. The coroner's report revealed the cause an accidental overdose of fentanyl, heroin, and methamphetamine. For a man whose most famous song was a plea for survival and redemption, the irony was gut-wrenching. His passing shook the hip-hop and R&B communities. Tributes poured in from fans and fellow artists alike, remembering not just the hitmaker, but the vibrant personality with trademark braided hair and a contagious smile. Though often labeled a one-hit wonder, his influence went deeper. He bridged rap and mainstream pop, showing the world that socially conscious lyrics could dominate the charts. Coolio's story is bittersweet. He was proof that raw honesty in music could break barriers, yet also a reminder of how fleeting fame can be. The man who once stood at the center of global hip-hop culture ultimately could not escape his own struggles. And still, every time Gangsta's Paradise plays, the world remembers his brilliance, his energy, and the tragedy of a life cut short by the shadows he could never outrun. Shock G. Gregory Edward Jacobs, better known as Shock G, was born in Brooklyn in 1963, but it was in Oakland, California that he found his true rhythm. To most of the world, he was the playful alter ego Humpty Hump of digital underground, famous for the comedic hit The Humpty Dance. But behind the fake nose and quirky persona was a brilliant musician, producer, and innovator who shaped hip-hop and R&B in profound ways. Digital Underground emerged in the late 1980s with a unique blend of funk rap and R&B that stood apart from the hardcore street image of West Coast hip-hop. With Shock G at the helm, the group became a creative hub, fusing humor with serious musicianship. Their 1990 debut album, Sex Packets, went platinum, fueled by the Humpty Dance, which remains a staple of hip-hop culture. But Shock G's contribution went far beyond novelty. He was an accomplished pianist and producer who layered funk, soul, and jazz into hip-hop, crafting tracks that were rich, playful, and timeless. Perhaps his greatest legacy was introducing the world to Tupac Shakur. Shock G not only gave Tupac his start by featuring him on Same Song, but also produced and co-wrote tracks on Tupac's debut album, Tupacalypse Now. Many insiders later called him an artist's artist, admired more by fellow musicians than by the mainstream industry. Yet, like so many creative geniuses, Shock G carried struggles that fans rarely saw. Beneath the humor of Humpty Hump was a man often wrestling with loneliness and the pressures of keeping up a double identity. Friends described him as a perfectionist, someone who poured himself completely into his work, sometimes at the expense of his own well-being. Do you think artists who hide behind alter egos do it to entertain, or is it also a way of shielding themselves from their own pain? On April 22, 2021, Shock G was found dead in a Tampa, Florida hotel room. He was only 57 years old. The cause, an accidental overdose involving fentanyl, methamphetamine, and alcohol. For fans who knew him as a joyful, eccentric performer, the news was heartbreaking. The man who had brought so much laughter and rhythm to hip-hop had quietly fallen victim to the same epidemic that has claimed countless lives. Tributes poured in from across the music world. Questlove of The Roots called him a true original, while fellow rappers remembered him not just for his hits, but for his generosity in uplifting others. His music continues to resonate, a colorful splash of funk and humor that reminds us hip-hop doesn't have to be boxed into one sound. Shock G's story is bittersweet. A gifted innovator who gave the world joy but carried private struggles until the end. Every time the Humpty Dance plays, fans remember not just the laughter, but the artistry behind it. A reminder that sometimes the brightest masks hide the deepest wounds. Old Dirty Bastard ODB, Russell Tyrone Jones, better known as Old Dirty Bastard. ODB was born in Brooklyn in 1968 and grew up in the rugged neighborhoods of Fort Greene and Bedford-Stuyvesant. Alongside his cousins Robert Diggs Arza and Gary Grice GZA, he co-founded the Wu-Tang Clan in the early 1990s, one of the most influential hip-hop collectives of all time. While Arze was the architect and GZA the philosopher, ODB was the wild card, the unfiltered, unpredictable energy that made Wu-Tang unforgettable. From the start, ODB's style was like no other. His voice cracked, slurred, and jumped off beat, yet it carried raw authenticity. Songs like Shimmy, Shimmy Ya, and Brooklyn Zoo showed his genius for turning chaos into art. On stage, he was pure electricity, a performer who blurred the line between comedy shock and pure hip-hop spirit. Even as a solo artist, his debut album, Return to the 36 Chambers, the Dirty Version, earned a Grammy nomination and cemented him as one of rap's most distinctive voices. But ODB's life was as volatile as his music. He became infamous for his antics like picking up a welfare check while MTV cameras rolled, despite having a platinum record, or interrupting the Grammys to declare Wu-Tang is for the children. To fans, these moments were hilarious and rebellious. To those close to him, they also revealed a man struggling to balance fame with deep personal turmoil. ODB battled legal troubles, financial instability, and an ongoing struggle with substance abuse that often overshadowed his brilliance. Do you think ODB's unpredictable persona was a calculated act of artistry, or was it simply who he truly was, raw and unfiltered? By the early 2000s, his life was spiraling. After serving time in prison for drug and probation violations, ODB attempted a comeback signing with Rockefeller Records under Jay-Z's label. Hopes were high for a resurgence, but tragedy struck before he could complete his new album. On November 13, 2004, just 2 days shy of his 36th birthday, ODB collapsed in a recording studio in Manhattan. The cause was ruled an accidental overdose from a lethal combination of cocaine and the prescription drug tramadol. His sudden death sent shockwaves through hip-hop, leaving fans mourning the loss of a one-of-a-kind artist. In death, ODB became larger than life, remembered as both a mad genius and a tragic figure. Fellow Wu-Tang members hailed him as the raw soul of the group, the piece that made their puzzle complete. Today, he remains a cultural icon, inspiring generations of rappers who embrace imperfection and individuality. Old Dirty Bastard's story is one of contradictions, chaotic, yet brilliant, comedic, yet deeply troubled, outrageous, yet vulnerable. He embodied hip-hop's refusal to conform, and in doing so became irreplaceable. Though gone too soon, ODB's voice still echoes in every shout of Wu-Tang, forever reminding us that sometimes the messiest spirits burn the brightest. Chris Mac Daddy Kelly. Chris Kelly, known to millions as Mac Daddy from the iconic duo Criss Cross, was born in Atlanta, Georgia in 1978. Alongside his childhood friend Chris Daddy Mac Smith, Kelly was discovered in 1990 by producer Jermaine Dupri at just 11 years old. What followed was one of the fastest rises to fame in early 90s hip-hop. With their clothes worn backward and their youthful swagger crisscross, became an instant sensation. In 1992, their debut single Jump exploded onto the charts, spending 8 weeks at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. It wasn't just a song, it was an anthem of a generation played everywhere from school dances to MTV. Their debut album, Totally Crossed Out, sold over 4 million copies in the US alone, making Kelly and Smith teenage superstars practically overnight. For a brief shining moment, Criss Cross wasn't just a group, it was a cultural movement. But fame that arrives in childhood is rarely kind. As the 90s wore on, Criss Cross struggled to maintain the same momentum. Their later albums failed to match the success of their debut, and by the late 90s, the group had faded from the mainstream spotlight. For Kelly, who had known global fame before he even entered high school, the transition to adulthood was difficult. Away from the cameras, he faced the emptiness that so often follows child stardom. Do you think the entertainment industry does enough to prepare young stars for life after the spotlight fades? Kelly's attempts at a solo career never quite took off, though he remained connected to music, occasionally performing and working behind the scenes. In 2013, Criss Cross reunited for a So Def anniversary concert in Atlanta, where Kelly took the stage once more to thunderous applause. Fans were thrilled to see him again, backward jeans and all. It felt like the 90s had come back for one more night. But behind the smiles, Kelly was still struggling. On May 1st, 2013, tragedy struck. Kelly was found unresponsive in his Atlanta home and later pronounced dead at age 34. The medical examiner ruled his death an accidental overdose from a mix of heroin and cocaine, often referred to as a speedball. For fans who remembered the boy who made the world jump, the news was devastating. It was a stark reminder of how fragile the lives of child stars can be once the lights dim. Chris Kelly's story is heartbreaking not just because of how he died, but because of how much potential remained. He was once a symbol of joy, energy, and youthful rebellion, yet he became another cautionary tale of fame's unforgiving nature. Still, his legacy lives on. Jump remains a timeless party anthem, and every time it plays, it carries with it the memory of the boy who brought so much fun to the world before leaving far too soon. The stories of these 12 black R&B legends remind us that behind every unforgettable melody lies a human being struggling with burdens the spotlight often hides. Their voices shaped generations, yet their untimely deaths reveal the painful cost of fame, addiction, and loneliness. As we honor their music, we must also confront the lessons their lives leave behind. Were they victims of circumstance, or did the industry itself push them toward destruction? Share your thoughts below, because at Legends of Black Excellence, we believe these conversations keep their legacies alive.